last year's preferred route from Turkey to the Greek islands was largely shut down.
The Great Channel Crossing Con, Labour's broken promises exposed. Right. Before we dive into this absolute shambles, if you're passionate about British politics and want the unvarnished truth about what's really happening in Westminster, hit that subscribe button now. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for what I'm about to reveal about Labour's spectacular failure on immigration. Now then, let's talk about promises, shall we? Specifically, the kind of promises that sound brilliant in a press conference but turn out to be about as effective as a chocolate teapot when reality comes knocking. We're talking about Labour's much-vaunted one-in, one-out agreement with France, a policy that was supposed to revolutionize how Britain handles Channel migrants. Spoiler alert, it hasn't revolutionized anything except perhaps the art of political embarrassment. Here's a jaw-dropping reality that should make every British taxpayer's blood boil. Since this grand agreement was announced with all the pomp and circumstance of a royal wedding, exactly 0 migrants have been returned to France. Not one. Not a single soul out of the 3,567 people who have successfully crossed the Channel in dinghies since the deal was supposedly ratified. That's not a typo. Folks, we're talking about a 100% failure rate. Let me paint you a picture of just how spectacularly this has backfired. When Labour ministers strutted into those July press conferences, they were practically bursting with confidence. Deportations will start very soon, they declared. We're targeting the initial small boat arrivals, they promised. The audacity was breathtaking, and as it turns out, entirely misplaced. Fast forward to September, and what do we have? Home Secretary Yvette Cooper, squirming in Parliament like a schoolchild caught copying homework, having to admit that these long-delayed deportations might, and I stress might, finally begin later this month. The woman who once promised swift action is now speaking in the kind of vague terms that would make a fortune teller blush. But here's where it gets truly farcical. The government is so embarrassed by these numbers that they are refusing to release the actual statistics. When MPs pressed Ms. Cooper for specifics about how many people would be in the first batch of returns, she clammed up tighter than a Victorian maiden aunt. Instead, we got the usual political waffle about pilots and development phases. It's almost as if they're hoping we'll all forget they ever made any concrete promises in the first place. Meanwhile, and if you're finding this analysis as infuriating as I am, make sure you're subscribed because there's plenty more where this came from. The boats keep coming. 29,000 migrants have crossed the Channel so far this year. Let that sink in for a moment. That's not just a record. It's 38% higher than last year's numbers. While Labour politicians were busy congratulating themselves on their diplomatic breakthrough, nearly 30,000 people were making the journey that this agreement was supposed to deter. The sheer brass neck of it all is what really gets to me. Remember when this deal was announced at the Anglo-French summit on July 10th? Sir Keir Starmer called it groundbreaking. President Macron nodded along approvingly. The media lapped it up. Here was Labour, finally getting tough on immigration, finally showing they could match the Conservatives on border control. Except, as we now know, it was all smoke and mirrors. Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary, summed it up beautifully when he told the Mail that under Labour, a small boat to the UK is a one-way ticket to one of Keir Starmer's cushy hotels, paid for by hard-pressed taxpayers. He's not wrong, is he? While ordinary British families are struggling with the cost of living crisis, we're footing the bill for what amounts to a luxury travel service for illegal immigrants. But let's dig deeper into the mechanics of this failure, because the devil, as they say, is in the details. The treaty was supposedly ratified on August 4th. The Home Office had announced that detentions had begun for those who arrived on August 6th. They even gave us a timeline. The UK would make referrals to France within 3 days, and the French government would be required to respond within 14 days. Sounds efficient, doesn't it? Sounds like a well-oiled machine ready to spring into action. 4 weeks later, those initial detainees are still sitting in British detention centres, presumably wondering what all the fuss was about. The cases are still moving through the bureaucratic procedure, we're told. Bureaucratic procedure. There's a phrase that should strike fear into the heart of anyone expecting swift government action. What makes this even more galling is the way the government tries to spin these failures. When pressed about the dismal lack of results, Ms. Cooper pointed to the National Crime Agency's record 347 disruptions of immigration crime networks. Sound impressive until you realize that 84% of these disruptions were classified as not high impact, resulting in just 26 arrests for organized immigration crime. 26 arrests against nearly 30,000 successful crossings. Those aren't odds you'd want to bet on. And here's the kicker that really exposes the hollowness of Labour's approach. While they are patting themselves on the back for reducing the number of boats in August to 55, the lowest since 2019, they're conveniently ignoring that these boats were packed tighter than sardine tins. Those 55 boats carried 3,567 migrants, barely fewer than in previous peak months. The smugglers have simply adapted, cramming more people into fewer vessels, making the crossings even more dangerous. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Surely the Conservatives didn't do much better? And you'd have a point. Labour sources are quick to remind us that the Tories' Rwanda scheme cost £700 million and managed to send exactly 4 volunteers. 4 people for £700 million. That's £175 million per person, which makes even the most extravagant government spending look positively frugal. But here's the thing, and this is crucial. Labour didn't campaign on being slightly less incompetent than the Conservatives. They campaigned on having solutions. They promised they could smash the gangs and regain control of our borders. They told us they had a better way. What we've got instead is more of the same, just with different colored rosettes and slightly more creative excuses. The political pressure is mounting, and you can sense the panic in Downing Street. Sir Keir Starmer, who once promised to close those expensive asylum hotels quickly, is now talking about accelerating the process. Political speak for we haven't actually started yet, but we really, really want to. Meanwhile, Labour backbenchers are getting restless, demanding more decisive action against illegal migration. The honeymoon period is well and truly over. What's particularly maddening about this whole debacle is how predictable it was. Anyone with half a brain could have told you that a complex international agreement involving 2 different legal systems, multiple bureaucracies, and competing political pressures wasn't going to deliver results in a matter of weeks. But Labour politicians, drunk on their own rhetoric and desperate to appear tough on immigration, made promises they couldn't possibly keep. The opposition, naturally, is having a field day. Conservative MPs are queuing up to remind anyone who will listen about Labour's broken promises. Reform UK is positioning itself as the only party willing to take truly decisive action. Even within Labour's own ranks, there's growing frustration with the leadership's handling of immigration. The political calculus that seemed so clear in July is looking increasingly shaky as autumn approaches. What's most concerning is the government's apparent belief that they can simply ignore this problem until it goes away. The refusal to release deportation statistics, the vague promises about future action, the constant deflection to past Conservative failures, it all suggests a government that's more interested in managing the narrative than solving the underlying issues. But the British public aren't stupid. They can see the boat still arriving. They can read the headlines. They can do the maths. When you promise to return migrants in a matter of weeks and then admit months later that you haven't returned anyone at all, people notice. When you claim to be smashing the gangs while crossings reach record levels, people notice. When you spend more time criticizing your predecessors than actually governing, people definitely notice. The tragedy is that there are solutions to this crisis, but they require political courage that seems to be in short supply in Westminster. Proper offshore processing, robust return agreements backed by real consequences, serious investment in border security, and yes, an honest conversation with the public about the trade-offs involved in any immigration policy. Instead, we get political theater designed more for social media clips than actual results. If you're as frustrated with this political charade as I am, make sure you're subscribed to UK Connors because we'll be tracking every twist and turn of this ongoing debacle. We'll hold politicians accountable for their promises and call out the spin wherever we find it. The one-in, one-out agreement was supposed to be Labour's answer to the immigration crisis. Instead, it's become a perfect symbol of everything wrong with modern British politics. Big promises, minimal delivery, and a stubborn refusal to admit when things aren't working. While politicians play their games, the boats keep coming, the gangs keep profiting, and the British public keep paying the price. That's the reality behind the rhetoric, And it's a reality that every voter needs to understand as we head into what promises to be a tumultuous period in British politics. Stay informed, stay critical, and most importantly, stay subscribed, because this story is far from over.